question that was looming in the back of my mind that I had not answered with any of this, none of this, was answered by this guy. His name's Dr. Nathan Jacobs.
Oh.
And it's when we were discussing it at the round table, and I remember texting you after we had left. I said, what is that word you used when we were talking about how evil spirits, demons, actually metaphysically mess with people, right? Because I had an idea, but I really couldn't pin it, you know. And you said it's a spectrum. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
And then you said, you want me to just read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I got it here to read. It said, because this answers the second part about my work and what I was going to say about energy. You said, we are porous beings who take in our environment. And that's true, which can either make us thrive or make us sick. Yep. Go drink some bleach. Therefore, in the same way, we live in a spiritual environment, surrounded by angels, demons, and we are susceptible to their energies precisely because we are made to be susceptible to them. They are ministering spirits whose role in the cosmos is to carry the divine energies to us and energize us. Just because angels become corrupt does not mean that we cease to be susceptible to their energies. Therefore, the experience of demons is not an outside influence. Now there goes to my work. I was trying to come up with these names like temptation, vexation, oppression, you know,
right.
These stages, right? Yeah. And in my actual experience with these, it's never a stage, right? It's never demons don't take you from temptation to possession overnight. Right? Go read Son of Sam stuff. Go read Ted Bundy stuff. Go read all these serial killer stuff. They never take you. It always starts in childhood or some other time where you're doing something. All right. Anyway, you said temptation, encroachment, oppression versus an inside influence, possession. Rather, it's all a spectrum of being energized by them. We can fortify ourselves against the influence by exorcism, emptying the house, baptism, union with Christ, charismation, filling the house, Eucharist, imbibing the divine energies, confession, ongoing purification, asceticism, putting to death the passions by which the demons take advantage, and prayer, lifting the soul to God. However, we are still in that environment, which is why you and I can begin to feel sick from reading a black magic text, like that would happen to me. We are opening ourselves up to spiritual energy, particularly demonic energy. Ouija board. This is a critical feature in Orthodox spirituality. So this narrows it in all for me. This is the critical feature that the Catholic Church, the Catholics, you know, this is their big book, Introduction to the Science of Mental Health, Dominion. This is Father Chad Rippenberg or something. Protestants, this is where they don't get it. Yes, in prayer, we may ask God to do something, heal or show mercy or offer guidance, but we are also opening our soul to God and inviting Him. And conversely, there are energies we can engage that open us up to demonic energies. It is fine to refer to the demonic activities of temptation or oppression. The demons do tempt and oppress. Nevertheless, possession is more a matter of degrees than kinds. And I use that exact line in my book. And I didn't know you, right, when I wrote that. When we open ourselves to the demonic, whether it's truth, indulgence, sin, or the Ouija board, we are opening ourselves to demonic energy. And in the most extreme cases, you see demoniacs or demonism who operate synergistically with the demons. It's not the puppet stuff, right? Cooperating with the devil. The single agent acting with his energy and the devil's energy in the single act, like an inflamed blade that cuts and burns simultaneously. In addition, in some cases, the person himself seems to lose himself, and here we get to what is often called possession or some kind of symbiosis. And I'm like, well, there's my answer.
Well, that's a pretty good text, I got to say.
You wrote it, I'd been reading Palamos and David Bradshaw stuff, but I was still trying to answer the question. You read a lot of stuff about evil spirits and the fathers and stuff, but you put it together for me in my mind and how it works. And, that's the critical features, the essence energy distinction, but I don't think anyone else has. So,
yeah. Well, and I don't know how many, I can't recall if I've talked about this on the podcast yet. I know that there's an upcoming interview I have with Father Maximus McIntyre that's coming up, Orthodox priest who worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren.
From the script?
Yep. The guy who, from the movie script, They Dwell Among Us.
Ooh.
But so I ended up, delving deeply into demonology myself when working on that project, because, I won't say too much about it because that interview will say plenty. But you've read the script, right? I shared it with you twice. Was it any good? Did you like it?
I'm gonna read it again.
All right.
I mean, when you go watch movies that deal with this subject, it's always a Catholic priest.
Mm-hmm.
When you inserted an Orthodox priest, everything changed. Yeah. The whole dynamic of the storyline changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was really the point, right? I mean, part of what I was saying was whenever I'd talk with folks about it in Hollywood, I'd say like, look, if you've seen The Exorcist, you've seen them all because it's always Catholic, but there's a different worldview with the Orthodox. There's a different ethos and so on. And so that was part of the hook with them. But it was also based on a real guy, right? On Father Maximus, who I've got that upcoming interview with. But I tell you, you talked about the ways in which these things become concrete. It goes from theoretical to concrete. The metaphysics of it were theoretical before that project. But, you using an example like getting sick from reading black magic texts, that's experience, because what started to happen in my own life and in my own world was exactly that, right? The deeper I went into it, the moment I stepped into that project, I saw it. I saw the ways things manifested in my life. I saw it. Some of it was obvious, overt stuff like people being yanked out of bed, right? Some of it was more subtle, like weird. You talked about these sort of alien thoughts, right? Or what the church fathers would call logismoi, right? These sort of demonic alien thoughts that come in. I started experiencing those sorts of things in the project, but also just the more subtle things, right? That I didn't recognize until in retrospect were probably demonic influence, just looking for ways to take advantage of wherever you're weak and whatever else. But it also included a lot of things like that. I just recognized that at some point when we were doing like test footage and things like that for that project, I refused to let our prop master make like the black magic text. I was like, I'll make the black magic text. And which meant I was reading different black magic texts. I was notating them. I was building them. I was building this prop for a character who was a demoniac. And it made me sick. There was a threshold for like, I can't go any further working on this. Yeah. Because the thing I'm drinking in is poisonous. Yeah. Right? Like that's what it is. And so yeah, now, the reality of that was.
Would you call that the energy?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so part of what I talked about there is I think this is something that not a lot of folks recognize, but I tried to draw out in the script, right? In that movie script. That's why it was called They Dwell Among Us, right? Because it was trying to say, rather than having this sort of two-story universe where you've got the fleshly realm here and then you've got the spiritual realm out there, and every now and then things, come in and out or something like that. Seeing those two worlds as overlapping, one being invisible behind the veil, but they overlap. And I think when you look at the way in which the church fathers, especially the Eastern church fathers, understand the world, they see it in this hierarchical sense of basically, the great chain of being where you have rocks, plants, animals, humans, angels, and things like that. But one of the things that I think is an underappreciated aspect of providence and of anthropology and of angelology and thus of demonology is this feature in which let me approach it this way. On my Substack, I have a couple of different posts on providence, right? A peculiar feature of providence, I think, is one of them. I have a thought on providence. There's a couple of posts that I did on providence that try to highlight this. But I think it's a really underappreciated aspect of theology. When you look at scripture and you ask the question, like, how often does God himself show up directly, right? No intermediary, no prophet, no angel. The answer is pretty rarely, right? It's an extremely rare phenomenon. Now, the tendency, if you think of us as just closed systems where I'm an object, you're an object, and God's an object, then that starts to make you feel as if God is distant, right? Like God is a neglectful father who lives off someplace else, and he'll send a servant to talk to you, but he can't be bothered with it, right? An angel will show up and talk with you, or Moses will show up and talk to you, but he can't be bothered to talk with you.
Right.
But I think what's missed in that is that the normative mode of providence is this idea of synergy. And synergy, this idea that there are energies of God, that you and I have energies that we can give off and another person can take in, is critical to begin to see how that's an inaccurate picture of things. So for audience members, I won't go too deep down the road of energy or energies, but the basic concept was that, any sort of thing, right, has a nature, but it also has energies, expressions, operative powers that exude from it. So the church fathers will oftentimes talk about fire, and then they'll talk about the heat and the light being the energy that exudes from it. And one of the things that they recognize, drawn from St. Paul, and if you want to hear more about this, you can listen to my interview with David Bradshaw. We talk about, this in depth. But one of the things that they recognize is that energies are often communicable. So one of their favorite analogies is that you can put, iron in fire and it'll begin to glow and to burn, and you can remove it. It's still iron, but now it has these foreign energies within it. The heating properties of fire, right, of light and of heat, right, have been communicated to it. So it remains what it is, right? It is still iron. But the energies of a foreign nature have come to be resident within it. So that's the communicable side of the energies. And that begins in Alexandrian Judaism, and then it reappears in Paul. So Paul uses the language not only of energies, but also of synergy, right? Telling the Thessalonians that, you are co-workers with God. There he's actually, he's talking about synergy, right? That you and God are both doing the work simultaneously. And he even talks in Ephesians about the children being energized by the devil. So he talks about these sort of synergistic activities with dark forces. Now, the reason that's important is because when you talk about the presence of God or the activity of God being mediated, like the way I described, where God sends an angel or a man or a natural element or something like that, in English language, in our culture, we have a tendency to think of a mediator as someone who creates distance between, like, don't talk to me, talk to my lawyer, right? And that means I don't have to talk to you or interact with you. Some proxy interacts with you. But the mediator language in the ancient world, like in St. Paul, this is how John Chrysostom reads St. Paul, where there's one mediator between God and man, who is Christ. The mediator language there actually refers to a conduit, someone who actually joins together two things or brings something else near. So you might think of it in the sense of a branding iron, right? If I were to heat up a branding iron, I bring it over to a cow and I burn it. Well, how distant does that fire feel to the cow? Not very distant, right? It's right there. And if you ask the question, what's burning the cow? Is it the iron or is it the fire? The answer is both. Right, the fire is what is burning the cow because it's energies that are doing it. Right, that's the expression of the fire. But the thing that brought the fire near is the iron.
Right.
And I think this is the critical feature, that if you look at the nature of providence throughout the Bible, one of the things that you see is that God, the normative mode of providence, is that God tends to operate synergistically. Like if Elijah shows up and heals somebody, well, does that mean Elijah healed them or God? And the answer is both, right? Elijah is like the branding iron who brings it near, but it really is God healing the person. And similarly, if you and I were talking with a saint like Elder Paisios, although he's now reposed, and we had an experience where his face is glowing, right, with divine light, with divine glory, which is something that certain people experience with him, we wouldn't look at each other and go, yeah, he's really great, but where's God? Right? Like we would recognize that what you're seeing there in him is God. We are seeing the divine glory through him, right? In and through him, he has brought God near to us. And what's interesting is, I think the normative mode of providence, the way the world is supposed to be, is that if the world had never fallen, is that what you would see is you'd see the angels, you'd see the hierarchy of angels who are obedient servants to God. They would be holy, not because they're holy in themselves, but because holiness is a divine energy. So they would radiate holiness. They would radiate glory. They would be eternal because they'd participate in the divine energy of eternity, which is something Pseudo-Dionysius talks about. The things that we would see in them would be manifestations of God. And the ministering spirits part is the sort of thing that in Judaism and Christianity, they were meant to be people who carry that near, that they mediate that to a creature, that they bring God near. And so, for example, in I think it's Second Maccabees, the Maccabees are energized for war by the holy angel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of a funny thing. We have a tendency to think of angels can only energize a person once they become demons, but they don't have that capacity when they're good.
Yeah.
But that's not the way the ancient world thought, right? They thought, angels are able to minister to humans and to energize them because that's what they're there to do, right? So the picture, this great chain of being picture, is there in order that the world as it's meant to be is that God energizes and communicates himself, right, to things higher in the chain, the highest order of angels, who carry that to the lower order, who carry that to man, who carries that to the animals and to the plants and things like that. And the whole cosmos is supposed to participate in and be glorified and energized by God, God cascading down through all of these sorts of things. Now, the reason that's important is because when it goes to this question of, things like prayer or things like participation of God, the sorts of things I was talking about in that text, we have a tendency to, again, think in these very closed system mechanical ways. All that's happening is I'm sending words into the air and I'm hoping that God hears me and I'm hoping that maybe he does something, right? Something like that. As opposed to recognizing that the very fact that I've uttered the name of God, that I've opened my soul up to God, that I've turned myself to God, right, is already itself something where I, as a porous being, who are made to be energized by God, who is also made to be susceptible to, other energizing spirits like angels. I've opened myself. Something is happening there, regardless of what God does, right? That sort of thing. Right. Just like, and this is one of the reasons why, one of the reasons I brought that up in the text is because I was like, well, that's the same thing that's also happening if you were to engage in an occult ritual. You start to invoke a certain name of a certain spirit that's a symbol that's tied with them. By uttering them, you open yourself up to them. You gauge the ritual. You open yourself up to them. And the fact of the matter is that you and I are porous beings. Just as organically, we live in a world where we're meant to take in air and food and water. We're supposed to process that. And in an ideal state, it would be good for us and it would make us healthy and strong, right? If we're in a toxic environment, you said go drink some bleach, like if you're in a toxic environment, it makes you sick, right? Well, so in the same way, we are made to be beings who imbibe the spiritual energy around us, imbibe the spiritual energy of saints, who imbibe the spiritual energy of the good angels, who imbibe the energy of God, But when you're in a fallen world, right, there is more than just good energy. Right.
Oh, yeah.
There aren't just angels, there are demons. And the fact of the matter is, those demons still can energize you, because you as a being are created to be susceptible to their energy. You as a being are made to be susceptible to the energy of other people. Right. We're supposed to minister it to each other. And so the fact of the matter is, if I'm interacting with somebody who is a demoniac, there's a good reason why something feels off or feels dark. You talked about it as a gut feeling. And yeah, that's our common parlance, but I think it's genuinely that we can feel or detect that dark energy that's exuding.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, like when we find objects that have demonic attachments, things that have been energized, right? This is the concept of relics and holy places and, things like that, which that it was, again, part of the concept in this ancient way of thinking that the energies don't just rub off from angels to man, but they can rub off to objects. They can rub off to places, right? Christ's robes become conduits for his divine energy. And so that's one of the reasons why walking into an occult store feels dark and weird. And it's not just the decor. There's a reason why if you pick up a black magic text and start reading it, and you're reading through names and symbols and things that have tethers to dark spirits, you start to feel that dark energy, and it makes you sick. And there's a reason why if you're interacting with somebody who has a dark demonic attachment, you can feel that dark energy. And so that's the entire point that I was driving at, is that once you begin to look at the world as more of a hierarchy that is an open, porous spiritual system meant to give and take, just like I talked about with the body and the soul, right? The body and the soul has a bilateral relationship where the soul can affect the body and the body can affect the soul. That's the whole cosmic organism. The entire cosmic organism is built in that way, where we're meant to be porous beings. And that's one of the reasons why I was saying that demonic possession, we use that language, but demoniac or demonized is more of the classical language of it. And it's because it's representative of a spectrum. You see certain people like the fortune teller in Acts who seems to have a cooperative relationship with the demon. Right? But then you see obviously other demoniacs who have a symbiotic relationship where they've lost themselves, right? They've gone so far down a destructive path. And that's one of the reasons I was saying it's a spectrum. And that spectrum doesn't just become external, internal. It's not like that, right? If I start to play with a Ouija board, I've opened my soul up, and me as a porous being, I've started to take something in. It starts in those simple steps, and that's why it's more of a gradation. And it is just are they outside of me and doing something to me, or are they inside of me? Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and follow, subscribe, hit like if that's an option on whatever you're listening to. All that sort of stuff really helps us out here. So I greatly appreciate your support. And until next time, I'm Nathan Jacobs, and this is the Nathan Jacobs Podcast.